Hey guys, welcome back to the Got Fishing Podcast. Really super excited about this one. I'm excited about all of the podcasts, but really excited about this one. I think there's going to be a lot of interest in learning a little bit more about what we're going to be talking about today, and that's Pyramid Lake, right outside of Reno, Nevada. And our guest today is Mike Anderson. He's the head guide with Reno Fly Shop, and really, he's the head guy at Pyramid Lake. This guy has been out there forever. I'll let him tell you a little bit more about it, but he really knows Pyramid Lake, a lot of the history of Pyramid Lake, and some tips and tricks and things that have been working over the different seasons. So we're going to explore all kinds of cool stuff about Pyramid, when you should be there, what you should be using when you get there, how to contact Mike if you're looking for a guide. So I just want to welcome Mike Anderson to our podcast. Hey, Mike.
Hey, Brian. How are you doing?
I'm doing really good. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, right on. So tell us a little bit about, I gave you a quick intro, but there's so much more to it. Tell us a little bit about, because what I love about you is there's a lot of guides out there that do this part-time. You are truly a full-time guide. You're raising a family as a full-time guide. This is what you do. And I would consider you a professional guide. Tell us a little bit about the history of what brought you to this point.
Yeah, so like Brian said, I have a 2.5-year-old son and a wife, a mortgage, all that good stuff. So I've been fly fishing since I was 13, as I think when my dad bought me my first rod. I was drowning worms before that, and once the fly rod hit the hand, that was it. So I'm a native to Reno. I've been fishing Pyramid Lake, the Truckee River, all of our stuff for, 26 years now, probably.
Wow.
I have a degree in criminal justice, and I worked in the mental health juvenile probation parole field for a few years before I decided to hang that up and started guiding for the Reno Fly Shop. And that was, I believe I'm on my 7th or 8th season right now. So that's kind of a quick where I got into this. So, yeah.
So this is something and these fisheries, you've been fishing them as a kid, and you kind of grew up on these waters and now have turned it into a profession.
Yeah, specifically the Truckee River. The Pyramid Lake really started to become popular and kick off probably around early 2000s, specifically when the Pilot Peaks were reintroduced in 2007. That's when we really saw the popularity of Pyramid Lake kick off and really increase. But yeah, I've been fishing. The first time I was out at Pyramid Lake, I was probably 8, with a little Spider-Man rod and a couple of woolly buggers and stuff tied onto a sinker and all of that. So yeah, it's been a great time to grow up in this area.
Well, let's dive right into Pyramid, since you brought it up, and I think that's a great segue. Is kind of, today it's popular. There might be some anglers out there
Yeah.
that haven't heard about it, but it's a popular destination today for anglers. It's a very special place, and we'll get more into that. But tell us a little bit about the lake's been there forever, but the popularity of it is just kind of beginning. Why don't you kind of back us up and tell us a little bit about how that all happened, and maybe tie in a little bit about these species that were reintroduced, I believe it was, and a little bit of that,
Yeah.
and how they've come to multiply in the numbers that they have, and the size that they have.
Yeah. So Pyramid Lake was a part of Lake Lahontan. We're talking 10,000, 15,000 years ago, right after the Ice Age. Pyramid Lake was the deepest spot of Lake Lahontan, over 900 feet, and today Pyramid Lake is still roughly about 350 feet deep at its
Wow.
deepest. And this Lake Lahontan covered northern Nevada. Walker Lake, which is about a 2.5-hour drive south of us, is also a remnant of Lake Lahontan. Unfortunately, that lake is too salty now, and nothing really lives in it anymore. And that's the way Pyramid Lake is going and will eventually go. Hopefully, not for a couple thousands of years, but
Yeah.
Pyramid Lake is salty. It is alkali, and it is a terminal lake. Water comes from the Truckee River, ends at the lake, and the only way that water leaves is through evaporation. So we're in this really interesting ecosystem where these cutthroat trout are ancient. They're prehistoric. They're dinosaurs. They've been around for tens of thousands of years, if not longer. And the original strain that was in the lake was unfortunately lost in the early 1900s due to overfishing, commercial fishing, and also through Derby Dam, other dams that were put onto the river that blocked these native cutthroat from their spawning ground.
Got it.
We're very fortunate that a biologist by the name of Robert Behnke rediscovered these trout on the border of Nevada and Utah in the 1970s. And there was no genetics back then, at least not to the ability that we have even 20 years ago. So he set up a hatchery system for this cutthroat trout that he found. And it wasn't until the 90s that Mary Peacock finally had the technology of DNA research to link the fish that Robert Behnke found to a specimen of the original fish from Pyramid Lake that is in the Carson City National Museum, or not National, excuse me, State Museum. And it was pure. So that is how we know that we now have the Pilot Peak strain is the strain that was originally in Pyramid Lake, and now are reaching 20 plus. I even saw a fish earlier this year at 30 pounds. So it's an incredible growing, bursting fishery.
Why? Why is it taken off? Once you were reintroduced, why have things taken off and gone so well?
Yeah, I think it's just genetics. Those fish are predisposed to get huge. When they were discovered by Behnke in the 70s, they were in a little creek and they were tiny, but they got the right conditions again, being back in their native lake, and they exploded. They are just genetically a large piscivorous lake form trout. And that's, one of the reasons that they get so big. They don't spend a lot of time in the Truckee River. They may go up there to spawn. I'm sure, obviously, they do. But even when they are young and immature, it's not very long that they stay in the river before they return to the lake. We have to remember, too, the Truckee River went dry every year. It's only in the past 100 years since they dammed 6 feet of Lake Tahoe that the Truckee River has year-round water. So these fish were opportunistic. They would run up the Truckee, they would spawn, the eggs would hatch, the smolt or the fry would come right back to the lake. So that's just what genetically these fish are designed to do, and it's probably part of the reason that they get so big is lake form trout don't have to fight against current. Food is more abundant and easier to pick off. I mean, you see that in most lakes where fish can get much bigger because they're not expending calories. And then these fish are just special. They're ancient and they just get huge. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and obviously, I guess I have a couple questions. Now
Yeah.
that the cutthroat are able, that we have water flowing down the Truckee, year round, are they spending more time as smolt in the river system, or are they still returning immediately to the lake?
They are spending more time, and this is pretty anecdotal data
Hmm.
that I have seen through Nevada Department of Wildlife and the federal fish and wildlife hatcheries. They are spending more time in the river because for smaller fish it is safer to be in a river system. Um, but to be expected, the larger fish that either can make it up past a couple of dams or that the Federal Fish and Wildlife will actually load into a truck and bring above certain dams, the fish are not in there for an extended period of time. So, I mean, that just goes back to there's more food in the lake. Why would you be in a river when it's harder to eat there? So,
That was my second question. The food in the lake. Obviously, that with the amount of fish that are now there, the size that they are, obviously Pyramid Lake is a very healthy. It's providing a lot of food. What are they mainly feeding on?
yeah, their main forage is the tui chub, which is the bait fish out there. The tui chub is a warmer water species, so they're going to be more available to the fish when the water is above 55 degrees, which typically we see that happen May until probably mid-October, maybe even into November, and that's when the water will get colder. The tui chub will go into deeper water, and then the cutthroat have to deal with finding other food sources. And there's plenty of food sources. There's Sacramento perch in the lake. There's the kiwi, which is the native sucker fish. There's bugs. There's carp. There's a lot for these fish to eat. It just so happens that the tui chub are almost an unlimited food source for these fish. Some of the bait balls that you can see of the tui chub in the early season, October when it opens, I mean, they'll be half a football field large. I mean, there's just so much bait, and that's obviously part what allows these fish to get so big is
Right.
that their food is nearly endless.
All you can eat buffet.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and that's great information. I really appreciate that. Some of it I'd heard, but some of it I hadn't. So I love learning all the nuances of these different fisheries. I think one of the things that Pyramid Lake is known for, and I just got back from Jurassic Lake, and we were actually talking about this, and I'll tie Jurassic Lake into this story later on. But one of the things that Pyramid Lake is known for is fishing off of ladders.
Hmm.
You don't see that really anywhere else. It's a very unique thing, and I think kind of special to Pyramid Lake. I'm sure there are other places, but kind of talk us through that. I mean, part of it I understand, but for the listeners, why are people using ladders on this lake? Why is it effective, and why aren't you just seeing people standing out there waiting?
Yeah, so this is where I divert from a lot of people. I use ladders, 100% I do. But a ladder is a tool, and we don't use the same tool for everything, right? You don't hit a hammer for a
I like
screw,
that.
that kind of
Yeah.
an idea. So the ladders are designed, let me back up a little bit. Pyramid Lake has very severe drop-offs at times. Some of the drop-offs at the south side of the lake, if your feet are wet, you take 5 more steps out, you're in 15 feet of water. So the depth drops immediately. But there's a few places on the lake too where that drop off is much further out from shore. And so you can wade out with your ladder to 300 feet sometimes, and the
Hmm.
water will be up to your chest. And that's where the drop off is. And that's the key to fishing Pyramid Lake is knowing these drop offs, finding them, and then getting into an area that you can cast off of the drop off. And so a lot of beaches, especially towards the middle part of the lake, you do have to walk out chest deep to even get to that drop off. And that's where the ladder comes in. Typically, not this year. This year's pretty warm. But typically, the water is going to be 39 degrees, 40 degrees. It's going to be, a 20-degree after wind chill, snowing sideways. So the ladder gets us up out of the water, keeps the waves from crashing on top of you, which there's always a pretty good chop at the lake, usually.
Right.
And so that just gets us up out of that. The problem with ladders, though, is that it's become a monkey see, monkey do, where somebody goes, well, he has a ladder, I need a ladder, I'm going to go put it in. There are certain times that you need it, certain times that you don't. Anecdotally, I've had many a time where I've fished certain beaches that you would typically use a ladder, where I didn't put the ladder in, I was just casting from shore, catching fish left and right. Somebody comes down, puts their ladder in, fishing dive. The fish want to be where they want to be, and sometimes you need a ladder to get to them, sometimes you don't. So always have your ladder, but don't always just pull it out because that's what you do. You
Right.
definitely want to try and figure that out first.
That's great information because I know a lot of anglers who fish Pyramid Lake and just assume that you're using a ladder. And that's just how you fish Pyramid Lake. So um,
Yeah.
I like that. How what traditionally how are people fishing this lake? Indicators, stripping. What is the style of fishing that's happening, whether you're on a ladder or not?
Yeah, well, yeah, you said it perfectly right there. There's basically two ways that we fish. It's with a switch rod, floating line, and an indicator, and then suspending balanced leeches or chironomids, midges under that. or we're going to be single hand, 8 weights, integrated shooting heads, and then we're going to be retrieving your woolly buggers, your beetles, boobies, some attractor flies, stuff like that. For me, what dictates how I'm fishing is going to be weather. If I can teach anybody from this podcast, the number one thing that we want out at Pyramid Lake is weather. We want some wind, we want some chop, you want maybe a little bit of rain or snow. That's really what gets these fish excited. And especially too, if that storm that I'm talking about, if it's more of a consistent temperature storm, if we don't see like a crazy drop or a crazy acceleration of the water temperature through the storm, that's what's going to make the fish the most happy. So definitely want to focus on the stormier days if you can. But that's going to dictate how I fish. So a really stormy day, I'm probably, if it's really choppy, really stormy, I'm probably going to stick to the retrieve bite if I can, depending on wind direction and all of that, just to make sure that my line stays down and I'm staying taut. One of the thing that doesn't work well with the indicator is when you have a lot of chop. Your flies are only weighted so much, so there's going to be some slack in your system, even if you're adding split shot to your leader, which I do on the indicator. If there's too much wave, there's going to be slack. You're going to miss takes, and so that's where the strip can help a lot. But if it's a calmer day, maybe a little more sunny, where the fish aren't willing to come up onto more of the shallower areas that we would traditionally strip from, then I'm going to go into a little more of a deeper drop off, use that indicator, and try and just dangle a food item in front of those fish for a longer period of time.
Obviously, I have had the luxury of fishing Pyramid. I've had the luxury of actually fishing Pyramid with you years ago. And so that is one of the interesting aspects about Pyramid, is that most people, when they go fishing, they're looking for a nice day. And at Pyramid, you want it to be windy. You want it to be choppy. You want there to be some weather that blows in. And the worse the weather gets, the better the fishing gets. And we actually experienced that out at Jurassic Lake as well. It's one of the things that's so similar about it, that the worst day that we had out there, and it was a bad day with the wind. The biggest fish was caught, 19 pounds, 4 ounces. And we've had that same experience out there. Actually, the guy fishing team was out there last year, and we're heading back here in a couple weeks. But last year, we were fortunate or unfortunate enough to run into some really nice weather, some beautiful days. And on those beautiful days, the fishing was not so beautiful. They were tough. And so, you do want that weather, and then balancing out between whether you're going to be stripping a streamer or whether you should be using an indicator. Obviously, kind of depends on for some anglers, do they have extra gear? Do they have a switch rod? And then of course, one of the things too is intermediate line. Talk us through a little bit about that. There's so many different sink lines today. What if a guy was to run to the Reno Fly Shop, what should he be asking for? He rolls into town to go to Pyramid. What kind of intermediate sink or full sink does somebody want for Pyramid Lake?
Yeah, so my go-to line is the Scientific Angler Cold 30, and it's basically a 30-foot head of Sync 6 to Sync 8 rate tungsten impregnated head there. And then you really want that the running line to be an intermediate running line. What that does is it's going to give you a little less of a bow. So if I have a really fast sinking head and then say a floating running line, I'm going to get this big hinge. It'll kind of smooth out a little bit, but I'm going to get more of a hinge than I would if I have that intermediate running line. I'm going to get a little bit more of a taut system, and that's going to help you with feeling, detecting strikes and all of that. But it's also going to allow you, once you get your line down, to maintain it at a certain depth. With a floating line and a sinking head, as you're retrieving, the head is following the floating line and coming up. Where with the integrated line, it's going to stay much more flat and parallel, more toward the bottom, or just if you're, in 30 feet of water, sinking it to 15 feet, it's going to roughly stay more at that 15-foot mark, which makes you more able to have repeatability when you're fishing. And that's the goal when you're using the sinking line, is repeatability. The fish are at a certain depth, they want to chase something, it's your job to give it to them every time. And that's much easier with the indicator, because I'm set. Bottom fly, bobber, throw it out there. It's always at that depth. And so you really want to make sure too, with that sinking line, that you're counting that line down. So 6 inches a second sink, every 2 seconds is a foot. If I need 15 feet, I'm counting to 30 seconds, roughly, right? And so, that needs to happen every time you cast. Because what will happen is, what I like to do with my clients is, if I know the fish are anywhere from 10 to 18 feet, I'm going to start them at probably 10, probably at like a 15-second sink. So I'm always a little bit above those flies to start, and then do a couple of casts at that, and then drop down to 20. A couple of casts, drop down to 25. Boom, we get a strike. My next cast, I'm going to go back to that 25 and see if I can't get another. And then usually that's going to be the spot that you stick to. The fish really don't vary in depth too often. It can happen, but their depth doesn't change that often throughout the day. It's more month to month or week to week, I would say more. You find the fish at 10 feet down or 8 feet down. So make sure you're counting that sinking line down.
We'll talk about that here in a second, the times to be there and how that factors the depth that they're in. But that's one of the things that I do love about pyramid is with the strip bite versus the indicator, is hunting for them. And it also happens with the indicator, because you'd have to find that depth. Once you find it, you found it. But I like that with the strip set, are they at 8 feet, 10 feet, 12 feet, and then kind of hunting until you find them, and then just kind of staying on that. Because like you said, when you find them, that's where they're at. And if you can mimic that same cast, that same depth repeatedly, you're going to have a lot more success than just randomly throwing it out there, talking to your buddy, letting it sink for a little bit, and then start stripping it in. So I think that's great info.
Right.
On social media, obviously today we see these hogs being caught, and you hear of going out to Pyramid Lake and truly fishing hard and being grateful that you pulled in one of these trophy fish, a double-digit fish of some sort, whether it's 10 pounds or 20 pounds. Obviously 30 would be incredible, but the anomaly. But going out there and with someone like you, and coming away with a day that you've had a couple opportunities and landed one of these, that's the expectations at Pyramid Lake. I feel like it should be.
Sure.
But you hear these stories of guys that are just, the fish are at the ladder. I mean, they're just stroking them. Talk to us a little bit about the different seasons. First off, tell us the season, and then tell us, as an angler, when should we be there and why?
Sure, definitely. So the lake opens October 1 and then closes June 30th, the last day of June. I personally don't guide out there too much until the water temperature really starts to drop and the fish start coming out of deep water. So when the lake opens and through most of the summer, the fish are down pretty deep. They're going to be 30, 50, 60 feet down. And for water, every 30 feet, 33 to be a little more exact, is an atmosphere. And we have to remember that these trout have a balloon inside of them, their air bladder. And so when a fish is below that atmosphere and you hook them and you bring them up to the surface, there's a good chance that you can injure them. It's kind of like the bends for us, right? It's not so much that the balloon inside of them is growing, it's that the nitrogen in their blood is actually growing as well. And so you have to be pretty careful catching fish below 30 feet of depth. So I typically won't start guiding out there until that happens. It gets a little cooler, the fish get a little more shallow, which is usually mid-October.
Okay.
And
like that.
Mid-October until about Thanksgiving is a really fun time. It's typically a little bit more on the numbers side of things, catching more fish. And there's usually a decent fish in that as well. But the water's cooling, the fish are slowing down. They're starting to get away from the tui chub as their main food source. But that's definitely more of like a numbers time. More on the strip too. You're going to be doing a lot of retrieving, casting your shooting head pretty far that time of year. Thanksgiving until about mid-January is what we call the winter or the middle season. That's typically going to be a little bit of slower fishing, but that is when we start to see the larger fish being caught. So that's more of like our trophy season. Like you said, the expectation out there is a 10-pounder plus. That's what most people at least want to try and get.
Right.
I'll tell you, there are plenty of skunk days out there as well. Like we talked about, if the weather's nice, the fishing's going to be tough. So, but that's typically where we're not going to get a bunch of fish, but we're looking for the quality. We're looking for the biggest fish in the lake that are happy to come up and eat. And that's where we're typically too starting to get a little more into the indicator bite, using a balanced leech. A little early for the midge typically, but that's when we start to see that transition where the fish aren't as willing to chase because their main prey source is just not around.
Cool.
And then the last part of the season is going to be again mid-January till about mid-May. And that's our numbers time of year. That's where the water's warming up, the fish are getting active, the chironomids are going to start hatching, your Sacramento perch are going to start getting a little more active. Towards the end of that, your tui chub are going to start showing up again. So end of January to mid-May is numbers. That's when we can catch a lot of fish. We can catch a lot of big fish. But again, it's all weather based. So even though that is typical, if it's a bright bluebird sunny day and calm, it's still going to be tough fishing. But like I said, that's the time where we do get most of our storms as well. We usually have what we call our miracle March, which is where we get 50% of our snowpack in a month, and it's usually in March. So that's definitely something that provides really good fishing out there. And then after about mid-May, the fish start heading deep again, and that's where I'll start turning to other fisheries, the truckee and other things around us. So that's kind of our breakdown of the season for Pyramid Lake.
You know, you and I were talking about this. But when someone does come to visit Pyramid Lake, whether they get a guide or they come out and DIY, it's really recommended that they do two things. One, look for bad weather. I mean, it's kind of the opposite of what you're traditionally looking for when you head out hunting, hiking, doing these things. You're looking for better weather. But here you're looking for some storms, like you said, some consistent storms where the barometric pressure and stuff is staying stable, whether that's up or down. And so, yeah, you're looking for bad weather, but also like you and I were talking about, at least 3 days, right? At least 2 or 3 days, because of that, it is a prolific fishery. It's got incredible fish. It can be incredible when it's on, but it also can be off. And giving yourself a few days is going to give yourself a much better opportunity at hooking that double-digit, potentially fish of a lifetime.
Yeah, I mean that like this week is a perfect example. So, it's a Monday when we're recording this here in Reno. It's 65 degrees, no wind.
Right.
It's going to be tough.
Yeah.
Tuesday, the next day, I think is even warmer, but we start to get wind. And sometimes too, like a temperature change like that can get the fish active. They'll acclimate to colder water, and then if you get a spike in temperature, that can get the fish a little more active. This is kind of like us when it's been 40 degrees and then today it's 50. We get outside, we tend to be a little more active, and it's the same for the trout. But what really is happening, say Tuesday, is the wind is going to pick up, and we have a storm coming in for Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And that's why, like you said, having multiple days out here is pretty crucial. Because if somebody just had me booked today, I'm sorry, it's gonna bluebird day and it's gonna be tough. We'll do our best. My goal as a guide is to always teach my anglers something new, to make sure that they leave me a better angler than they showed up.
I love that.
Because I can control that. I can't control the fish or the weather.
Right.
And so, that's why. Yeah, multiple days is definitely the way to go if that's in the budget for sure.
Well, and even a bad day at a pyramid, that's what's so cool about it. I have had those beautiful bluebird days, and even though the fishing is off, it certainly is an extremely cool place to just hang out, and I like that added
Yeah,
value
and
to the table of at least
that
learning something.
that's the nice thing too about the lake is it takes one fish, right? You
Right,
know, you can be out there all day and then you catch a 15 pounder in the largest trout that you're maybe going to catch in your life.
right,
So, I mean, there is that upside. Even if the fishing's tough, it takes one fish to really just change your life, change your perspective
right.
on this. So,
You know what? I have a story on that. The very first time that we visited Pyramid Lake, this was probably 2018, 2019. Heard all the cool stories, really had these expectations of going over there and pounding it. And we ran into that tough fishing. And we fished for 2 days and fished hard. And I think we might have pulled in, some nice ones, but they were small. They were that 5, 6 pound, which again, 5, 6 pound fish on a fly rod is a blast. But that's not why we were
it's
there.
great.
And
Yeah.
it was Sunday. Half our buddies left and started heading back, and a buddy and I were like, just like you were saying, the weather changed. I could feel it. The wind started blowing. It was instead of our back, it started blowing toward us. Things were just shifting,
Perfect.
so we stuck it out, and I did. I've hence caught a couple big ones, luckily, but that was my first double digits, a 13-pound cutthroat on a fly rod, and it was incredible. Made the entire weekend. So I love that point that
Yeah.
you bring up. That yes, it took one fish, and it not only changed it for me, but it changed it for my fishing buddy too, right? Because when you're fishing with a
Yeah.
true fishing buddy, it's not just who gets it; it's the team getting something like that accomplished. And yeah, it was extremely rewarding. It was tons of fun, and it's probably one of my favorite pictures to look at is catching that fish because I was jacked up, and it was at the last hour, almost the last cast. Big
Right.
waves. I remember my indicator going up with the wave, and then just shooting right down. I could see that indicator just burying in that wave, and boom. And it was hilarious too because our buddy that left with the net. So he ran in with this
Oh,
big fish
no.
and fighting it. We turned around, and there was this guy who had this net, but I'll send you a picture. But literally, it was a
Please.
fish.
Yeah.
It was a net that would belonged on the truckee,
Yeah.
not a pyramid. And so this fish gets tacoed in when we finally get it in the net. But it was a bit of a rodeo. But yeah, super
Yeah.
memorable and tons of fun. And it took that one fish. So yeah, and we've had days when we've gone there and everything just worked out. The weather was bad, the chop was perfect, the fish were in, and it was tons of fun. And obviously, we've been there, when it was opposite. Um, real quick, I just kind of wanted to tie in, like I said, Jurassic Lake. I think one of the things about Pyramid Lake that you and I have talked about so often is what a unique experience it really is. And for those listeners here who don't know what Jurassic Lake is a top 5 bucket list fishing destination in southern Argentina. It's a very remote lake. It is almost identical to Pyramid, where it has an inlet. There's no outlet. The only way that water leaves is through evaporation. It has extremely windy conditions. The cruddier the weather, the windier things are, the better the fishing. And the fish are over there. They're rainbows. They were a steelhead that was planted there years ago, and same thing, just absolutely took off because of the conditions of the lake. They also travel up the Barracosa River for spawning. So again, very, very similar. To do a trip like that is going to cost you somewhere between $9,000 and $10,000. When you're done and said with the experience and the flights and the gratuity and all of that. And for those that can afford that experience, it's 100% worth it. It is without a doubt a top 5 bucket list fishing adventure that you should do. But the point that I'm getting to is that we have Pyramid Lake here right outside of Reno, Nevada. And so for literally a tenth, if not less, you can go experience what I would consider just a world-class fishery. I don't know that it's going to rank as a top 5 bucket list destination, but for those of us that have gone and experienced it, it is mega cool. You can go catch a personal best there. It's a very special place, and what I love about it is not only the uniqueness of how you fish off of ladders and the different environments that you see. I love how the worse the weather gets, the bigger the fish are. But this is really a pretty easy trip to do as well. I mean, Reno, it's got a nice airport. There's lots of places to stay that are inexpensive. And so this is one of those trips where, for the listeners out there, if you're intrigued at all, I highly recommend, and we're going to get into how you contact someone like Mike, but I highly suggest that you look into this. We've run over the gear. It doesn't take much. It takes an 8-weight, takes a switch rod, a pair of waders, a ladder if you have one. But you also, I think today we learned, you don't need that. You don't need a ladder. And there's also different
Not
areas
every
throughout the lake
time.
we can fish off rocks and stuff like that. But if I was someone who didn't necessarily have all the gear, and of course there's a lot of anglers who do have the gear as well, but want to come there and have success, tell us how somebody gets a hold of you, and also walk us through a day out on the lake with you. What are you providing for the angler that flies into Reno and books 3 or 4 days with you? So how do we do it? And then what does our day look like when we're out on the lake with you?
Yeah. So I book everything through the Reno Fly Shop. You can always find me on Instagram. My handle is at mt_Anderson. And that's a good way just to get in contact and ask questions. But if you are going to book, you just go to renoflyshop.com or call the shop itself. They'll have you fill out a questionnaire. It's going to have a bunch of info on there. That way I know who you are, the things you need, and all of that. But yeah, like a general day, we'll meet up. You'll follow me out to the lake, or if you do need transportation, I can do that. We try to limit that as much as possible, but
Yeah.
hey, if you don't have a car, I will pick you up and take you out to the lake, no problem at all. I'll take care of all the gear, plenty of waders, boots, rods, all that good stuff. And yeah, we're going to fish the lake hard. We're going to probably hit, I mean, obviously at least one spot, maybe two. One thing about Pyramid Lake too is that the fish will come in and eat when they want to. It's not one of these where, oh, well, the fish are biting here more than here on most days. That can happen, but for the most part, you get to a spot that you're confident in that has a good drop off. Usually, if there's other birds around or if you're seeing fish rising here and there, good sign. But the fish are going to come in and eat when they want. So we do change spots here and there, but typically we won't. We're going to fish every way that we can at the spot we are, just to try and figure things out. A lot of the times, the fish are consistent within about a week, week and a half. So I've been out there for the past 2 months. I know what the fish are doing.
Right.
It's not too often or not uncommon that we get out there and we have a fish on within the first half an hour maybe, if everything is going well. So I provide lunch, and then we fish for 8 hours. We only do full days out at the lake, partly because, like you said too, I mean, multiple days is nice, but even within that day, if it's sunny in the morning and then the weather turns in the afternoon, you want to be there for that weather turning. So we only do full days out there. And yeah, like I said, you will leave me a better angler than you were before. I'm pretty confident in my abilities to teach both the retrieve, the cast of the switch rod, which can be a little funny if you haven't done it before.
Yeah.
But that's my goal, and hopefully a big fish jumps on the line, and it's the biggest of your life. That's always a goal too. But yeah.
Well, I want to touch on a couple points that I think get overlooked today when we're hiring a guide. A lot of times I see it on the Bitterroot and the Blackfoot and the Missouri and these places where you're hiring a guide just to get out there to take you down the river and obviously, give you some tips and stuff. But, what I love about you and why I really think, like the professional guide standpoint is that, leaving a better angler. There's not a lot of guides out there where that's their goal is to for the client to leave their boat a more educated, better angler. And I would highly suggest that guides learn to do that more, to appreciate more that this client has traveled a long ways, and yes, if everything works out and we're catching fish, that's why we're there. But to be able to come away as a better angler, there's many of us who, are just getting into the switch rods and would love to become a better caster. And that's the other thing that I wanted to say to these listeners is that, a lot of times I suggest people will say to me, oh, when I get better, I'm going to get a guide. No, no, now's the time to get a
Yeah,
guide.
good guy now.
Now,
Hmm.
you will become. It's hiring the right guide, and that's why I'm a big fan of you and sending people your way. Is even on a bad day, if you want to learn how to become a better caster, if you want to learn how to cast intermediate fly line better, because it's not easy to do, and it's not easy to do in wind, but it's something that challenges all of us when we step up to the plate at these different fisheries. We want to have success. Here's your opportunity to become a better caster. Or maybe you haven't used a switch rod yet, but you want to, and you want to buy one too. Well, perfect. You get to experience Pyramid Lake. You get to hang out with the best guide out there. You get to try out some different technology, and then head over to the Reno Fly Shop and buy that rod. So, or head back to your local fly shop and support them. But it gives you an opportunity to try some different techniques that I think, we're hearing more and more about. A lot of us are already using switch rods and things like that, but I know a ton of anglers that don't and want to add it to their arsenal. And I think that there's so many reasons to go to Pyramid Lake, from the beauty, how easy it is to access, the fish that are there. But the reason that I love working with you is the clients that come back, whether they've caught a personal best or just become a better angler. I think is really awesome. And I'm glad that you have that attitude. It says a lot about you and why you have so much success as a guide.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. Something that when I started guiding, really, I didn't fully understand was that the expectation is obviously to catch fish, but I can't make that happen, right?
Yeah.
I can put you in the best spot with the best fly. I can teach you how to do the drift just right. And if it's not going to happen, it's not going to happen. The fish are just turned off, whatever it is. I'm confident in my skills to teach you how to do it right. To where when the fish are active, even if it's that same day and we just needed an hour for the fish to wake up, that it's going to happen and that you're going to leave me an angler that can go to take your skills now to the Truckee or take it to the Bitterroot or the Boise or wherever. And that's to me actually more important than catching fish. That's one thing I tell all my clients too, especially on the river, or especially those that do book me to get better, is Tiger Woods didn't get good playing 18 holes a day. He spent time at the range. He spent time working on shaping shots and all of that. And it's what we have to do too. I personally still do this. My fishing, I have days where I just go and fish, sure, just have fun. But I have a lot of days where I take that first hour or even two, and my goal is to perfect the mend. My goal is to stop my rod higher and get my cast to launch further, make my flies land softer. But that first goal, that first hour is goal oriented fishing, where I'm trying to learn something. And that's really what I do with my guiding too, because I'll tell you what, better practices produce fish. So if I can get you to fish better, we're gonna catch fish naturally. And so that's
Yeah.
really what I focus on.
Well, and I love that because one of the things I tell people a technique is to stay detached from the outcome, right? And so when you're actually
Hmm.
practicing your cast and you're focusing on your casting technique or casting on some other form other than specifically catching the fish, at least for me, is most often when I actually catch that fish. So yeah,
Yeah.
there's uh, there's a lot of reasons to take advantage of the opportunity when the fishing might be a little bit slow, to kind of change your focus and like you said, work on some of the techniques. And the other thing that I love about hiring a guide and someone like you that is a casting instructor and Orvis endorsed, by the way, um, is that there's a lot of guys that are out there practicing bad habits and just ingraining bad habits. And so having somebody there, that's helping me perfect my cast. I do this at saltwater all the time. When I'm casting, I'm
Yeah.
always saying, give me advice. Don't just assume, and my style of casting, I want to become the best caster that I possibly can be. So give me advice when I'm doing it wrong, because when the action's hot and that permit is sitting out there, my cast starts to fall apart because I'm focused on that on the permit. Where if I was really more focused on my casting style, and making sure that everything is put. I bomb that cast out there, right? And so
Yeah.
I love having a guide to kind of help me perfect. Because even though I've casted in many, many different situations and had the luxury of casting around the world, I am still have so much to learn. And there's so many things that are changing with fly lines, rods, length of rods, all this stuff and the technology that we're using, fast action and medium fast. And so there's a lot to learn. And so again, I can't stress to people that are thinking, the value of hiring a guide isn't just about catching fish. It's about becoming a better angler as well.
Yeah, I still hire guides all the time. I'll tell you, it's I'd probably 2 or 3 times a year if I'm going, especially if it's somewhere I've never been. I'm gonna hire a guide. But there's days where I'll hire a guide to take me fishing for trout because I still will learn something, and I hope to keep learning something. If there comes a day where I know everything, I'm probably going to be done fishing. It's going to lose its appeal. It's the fun thing about the sport. There's always progression, and especially like you just brought up too, in the last 10 years, the technology seems to increase every 6 months. Something
No,
new comes out, something here, something there, and it's always fun to be on the newest, latest, and greatest, and see how that improves your quality of fishing. So
totally. The best anglers. That's why I like surrounding myself with guys that are out there using this new technology and new fly lines, whether it be Cortland or Scientific Angler, and different conditions and temperatures and what works. And yeah, I love this industry, and I love the things that are changing about it, and would love to be on the forefront of it. So obviously, I'm also a huge believer that old school works. I've said that message a million times. Like, you do not need a sage, and you do not need the best fly lines and all these things. You need a positive attitude, and you need the basics, and that will always get it done. The biggest thing is a positive attitude, but all these other things, hiring the right guide, having the right equipment, all of those things are obviously going to. And then in addition to your positive attitude is going to improve things. I want to jump back just real quick before we wrap this up, and touch back on the value, because that's really what's going through my head, especially again, like I said, just coming back from the Jurassic Lake experience. Um, let's talk about the price. I mean, because a lot of fishing guys have a buddy. They like to go to these places with a fishing buddy. There's a lot of solo anglers out there, and I think hiring Mike is amazing for the solo angler. But having a fishing buddy and going is even a better value because of the way that you have your trips priced out. So tell me a little bit about a couple guys or even 3 guys that are coming to Pyramid Lake and wanting to hire you for 3 days. Talk us, how much is it? And then how much better does it get the more people I add to it?
yeah, so our price is set up at $595 for the full day, and that's for 1 to 2 anglers. So for 2 people, that's perfect. You split it.
Yeah.
That definitely makes life a lot easier. For each additional angler is an additional 200. So yeah, you have your best value at that 500 or 595 for 1 to 2 anglers. I personally feel like too, I'll do all the way up to 4 people in a group. I feel like you're going to get the most benefit from that 1 to 2 as well. I'm
Cool.
more than happy, and it's really fun to have 4 people out there, especially if the fishing's hot. I never put the net down. I'm just running back and forth and side to side, and that can be a really exciting day. But you, as the individual angler, will get more out of it the less the people are there. So if it's just you and I, and we're at the north nets or whatever, you're going to be able to shoot that fly line 60 feet plus by the time we're done, because that's my goal. Especially when we're doing the retrieve bite, you need to cast it far, and if I can get you to push 60, 70, 80 feet, you're going to catch more fish, just because of the nature of that spot and the retrieve bite in general. The farther you cast, the more ground you cover, the more fish see your fly. So yeah, and that's, I mean, a good example too. If there's 4 of you and I'm jumping in between all 4 of you to teach you how to shoot that line, you're not going to get as much out of it. But
Right.
like I said, 4 people is still going to be a ton of fun. But if you're looking to learn, get the best value, I think that 1 to 2 angler is your best value for sure.
Cool. Well, I think we've covered everything. From the history of the lake to the gear that you should be using, um, how to get a hold of you. Again, for the listeners, you fly into Reno. There's from many places you can get an inexpensive ticket there. The hotel rooms there, because Reno is a casino town. There are many very very affordable hotels and accommodations. There's great restaurants there as well, which is really cool. Whether
Mm-hmm.
breakfast and dinner, you obviously are providing lunch. So for a truly what I would call and consider a world class trip, it's a very inexpensive. There's a ton of value to it, and so I do highly recommend, if you have any interest at all you got to do is fly into Reno with a buddy. Yeah, Mike takes care of everything else. All the gear is provided. There's going to be a lot of knowledge and a lot of information, and you will come away with potentially a personal best, or at least you're going to walk away from there a much better angler. And no matter what, whether you run into beautiful weather and slow fishing, or cruddy weather and amazing fishing, it will be an experience that you won't regret. Because I personally have been lucky enough to be out to Pyramid Lake multiple times, and I have fished in all those conditions. I've had amazing days. I've had big fish, small fish, and I've had slow days. And I've never walked away from Pyramid not thinking I can't wait to get back. So it is a special
Yeah.
place. And I really been wanting to introduce you guys to Mike, the Reno Fly Shop, because if you're going to head to Pyramid, this is the guy. You're going to be well taken care of. You've already heard it, but I would throw the sword down on this guy and say that you're going to have an amazing experience with Mike. So, Mike, thank you again for joining us. This podcast will probably go out after we've already been there, because we'll be down there in a couple of weeks. And so I really look forward to hanging out with you and doing a little fishing with you. And, thanks for being one of those professional guides that's setting the standard out there for the rest of the guides. Because I know that there's a lot of young guides out there that are looking to turn this into a profession. And I think you should reach out to Mike. Literally, he just gave you his Instagram. Like, if you know anybody who's in the industry, call this guy, pick his brain on how he's done and what's important to him, because I do think you set the bar for what a guide, how they should be thinking, and how, kind of the attitude that they should be having about a guided experience. So really appreciate you, man. I think you're a badass, and really appreciate you being on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, I can't wait to have you up here. We'll try and get into a few while we're out there.
I'm confident. Just praying for some cruddy weather.
Yeah, just need a little rain, a little snow. We're good.
Perfect. Mike, thank you. And to the listeners, please share this. I think this was an amazing podcast. There's lots of information here. A lot of anglers would be interested in what we were talking about today. So please share, please subscribe. Thank you again, Mike. And thank you all for taking the time to listen to this. We'll see you guys on the water. Thanks.
See you guys.